Well, hello, and welcome back to the Revolutionary Communist Podcast. It's been a few weeks, and what a few weeks that has been. Well, Lenin famously said that sometimes there's decades where weeks happen, and then sometimes there's weeks where decades happen. And that is definitely what has been transpiring before our eyes. There has been revolutions breaking out from Indonesia to Nepal to the Philippines, to Madagascar, to country after country after country, with a revolutionary wrath of the masses expressing itself. And now you have a general strike declared in Italy. A general strike declared in Italy tomorrow, not over questions of wages or pensions, although I'm sure people are upset about that, but over solidarity with Palestine. So yes, we are here today. I'm here with Marco Lagrada. We're here from the Executive Committee of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and we are here to discuss what is happening and what lessons we can learn from this, and how we can advance the movement here, the pro-Palestine movement here in Canada. So and yeah, what we can do, what we can learn from the Italians, basically. So yeah, maybe we can spend like a couple minutes talk a bit about the context, because there's been a whole bunch of stuff that's happened Palestine related, and then we can go on from there. I don't know if you wanted to, Marco, want to introduce the context here.
I think it's been a continuation of what we've seen. We've had now coming up on 2 years of genocide committed by Israel against the Palestinian people. Over 65,000 people dead, although that's
At least,
almost certainly an underestimate. An intentional policy of starvation that's, again, carried out by Israel. You have people literally starving in the streets of Gaza right now. And I think people are rightly horrified. People are seeing this, at home on their television screens. They're seeing starving kids, dead kids. And this has been going on uninterrupted. And I would say with the backing of the Canadian government, in particular the US government, which is the strongest ally of Israel, supplies it with weapons, supplies it with money, diplomatic support, and so on and so forth. And like you said, there's a seething anger really in every country, not just in Italy, in Canada too. We'll go into that, I think, in a bit. But people, I think, are rightly horrified and angry that our governments are sitting by while this is going on. So I think that's really the situation that's happening.
Yeah. So in terms of the movement, we have a big Palestine solidarity movement in various countries all over the world. This has been a radicalizing factor for millions and millions of people. Seeing the same government that are making our lives worse here, also supporting a genocide of people in Palestine, in the Middle East. And so I guess you've seen a shift a bit. I know after October 7th, 2023, there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of people that were kind of buying some of the arguments from the government, from the Western imperialists about Israel's right to defend itself, whatnot. But there has been a shift. Probably just a look at the polls will show us that shift. I know you had some polls. Did you want to maybe just describe those?
Yeah.
Like, what's the mood of people in Canada towards what's happening?
Yeah, well, I'll say this because, I've spoken to some activists in the movement. And I have to say that in the few weeks ago, there was an attitude amongst many of those activists that, people don't care about Palestine anymore. And the thing that led them to that conclusion is that these protests that have been happening in Canada and in other places had become increasingly smaller. And this led them to this conclusion that, okay, people just don't care about Palestine anymore. I think that's a very superficial read on the situation. Actually, I would add, before I go into the stats in Canada, in Italy, before this recent upswing in the movement, the Palestine movement, from what I understand in Italy, has been effectively dead over the last few months.
Oh,
You know,
really?
they had the encampments around the same time that we did, that the United States did. But after that, it's kind of been on the back burner, you could say. And then seemingly from out of nowhere, now we have this massive explosion. Of course, it's not from nowhere.
Yeah.
There was a seething anger that was building during that time. And what you've seen happen in Italy is that the movement has come back, but you could say it's come back on a much higher level. That the masses have learned certain lessons from things like the encampment movement, and now they're coming back on a higher level. We'll go into that. But in terms of the mood in Canada, there's been a huge shift in opinion. Yeah, there was a poll done by Angus Reid, which I think is very revealing. There's a few things, but the main thing, uh, do people believe a genocide is happening? And the poll showed that 52% of Canadians say yes, a genocide is being committed by Israel against the Palestinians. It breaks it down by party. Almost every party except the Conservatives has huge support for that belief. And even the Conservative Party, which takes a very, you could say, stridently pro-Israel position, even 24%, so a quarter of Conservative Party supporters, say yes, a genocide is happening. And then 24% say they're not sure. 50% say they don't think one is happening. This shows you the mood. A majority of the Canadian population says definitively a genocide is taking place in Palestine. One other thing, there's another question they asked. It says, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, who do your sympathies rest more with, the Israelis or the Palestinians? In November of 2023, so just about a month after this thing started, 28% were with the Israelis, 18% were with the Palestinians. When they did the poll again in August of 2025, a complete reversal. 37% are with the Palestinians. Now 19% are with the Israelis. So more than double are with the Palestinians. This is the real mood. Obviously, you know, you don't need polls to tell you that. You just talk to anybody. I mean, people are horrified. And how could you not be horrified? You're looking, you know, I watch the news. People watch the news. It's absolutely horrifying. And then our government's, sitting on its hands doing nothing.
Yeah, or saying like the new envoy to the United Nations or ambassador to the United Nations, David Lametti, saying, "Well, we don't know if it's genocide yet. We need to do a study." Right? These types of arguments that the Carney government is still making. Anita Anand has said similar things. So yeah, I think this is pretty clear what the polls are showing, that the overwhelming majority of the population has come to realize what's going on. Yes, some of them were confused at the beginning. The bourgeois media plays this game of confusing people, the right wing, whatever. But in spite of all of that, in spite of the unity of the Canadian media establishment, of the main bourgeois parties, even Jagmeet Singh didn't call it a genocide until a few months ago, right? I think it was. Damn, Bernie Sanders only called it a genocide like a month ago.
Yeah.
So, in spite of the almost unity of the political class, people have seen what it is. And that actually explains the shift in the political class. Jagmeet Singh called it a genocide leading up to the election. For the first time ever, I believe, Bernie Sanders has come out, but that's just the left wing. The liberals have even started to shift a bit. And the thing that they've done in classic hypocritical liberal fashion is they mentioned over a couple months ago, that they were, them along with Britain and France and some other countries, now it's a whole slew of countries, we're going to recognize Palestinian statehood. But yeah, we don't need to go on and on about that. I think a lot of people know about that. Some people have celebrated this as an advance. I would say it's nothing of the sort. It's a cynical maneuver to try to make you think that they're doing something when they are not. They're recognizing the Palestinian state as it's been destroyed, and with conditions that can't be armed and can't hold free elections, actually, determined from the outside. And actually, Carney's welcomed Trump's plan. So did many governments, so-called even progressive governments, like the Spanish government, I believe, welcomed
Hmm.
welcomed Trump's plan as well, which is a complete reactionary plan, actually that was edited by Netanyahu himself,
Hmm.
which guarantees nothing to the Palestinian people. Basically, it creates some sort of protectorate under Tony Blair and Donald Trump, policed by Muslim states. This is a completely reactionary plan. But yeah, Carney's welcoming that. So this just shows really the liberals are very good, and I mean liberals of all countries, they're very good at trying to appear as though they're doing something while doing the opposite. And that's really what they've been doing. And meanwhile, they've been continuing to arm Israel. There was a study put out a couple months ago in Canada that showed that even though they said they weren't, they have continued to arm Israel. So this really shows they're saying one thing and
Hmm.
doing the other. Um, so yes, uh, that is kind of the context here in which these events in Europe, in the Mediterranean, and in Europe have erupted. So it's all kind of, maybe we could talk a bit about the flotilla, because it's all connected a bit, or at least that was the trigger point. I think the anger already existed, but the trigger point for this movement here in Europe, in Italy and in Southern Europe in particular, is the flotilla. So I don't know. Do you want to
Well, if I could
say a
just say
few
one
words?
more thing about the
Yeah, sure.
recognition of Palestine, because I think it's connected in a way to what's happening in
Yeah.
Italy. That, I mean, obviously, I agree. It was a completely cynical maneuver, and it's in response to, I mean, these polling figures we have. Carney, I'm sure, has the same polling figures on his desk. And what they needed to do was to cut across the anger in society, give a sop to that anger,
Hmm.
precisely to avoid the kind of explosions that you're seeing in places like Italy. It's worth noting that the Italian government, which is a hard right government, you could say, the Meloni government, is one of the states which has not recognized a
Yeah.
Palestinian state. And you could say that in a way, she's now feeling the consequences of that decision. Obviously, that wouldn't have necessarily solved the problem. But that is what's motivated. You could pose the question, why now? They've been massacring the Palestinians, blowing Gaza to smithereens for 2 years. They didn't do it. They've been occupying them for 57 years. They didn't do anything. And suddenly now they're making a move to recognize a Palestinian state. Also, what state?
Yeah.
What state is there now? Their allies blown it up. They've destroyed what's left
Hmm.
um, of any future Palestinian state. So it's a completely cynical maneuver. And yes, it's a maneuver to cut across movements like we're seeing explode in Italy. But yeah, sorry, yeah, you were talking about the
Yeah,
flotilla.
the flotilla. So there's been a number of flotillas. I don't even know how many actually. This one, the Global Summit flotilla, has been traveling. It's 46 ships, and there's hundreds of people on board. I don't know how many exactly. And actually, these ships, this flotilla in particular, had, like some other ones, there's been some celebrities, some left wing celebrities, and people of note. This one had quite a few, apparently, has quite a few on it. Um, in particular, it had a lot of trade unionists from Italy and Spain and other countries that joined the flotilla that were on the boats. And yeah, the flotilla, the whole goal of the flotilla was to bring aid and medical supplies and help and to break the blockade of the Israeli military navy on Gaza. So this was a flotilla. It yesterday, I believe, yesterday evening, got into, well, it's actually Gazan uh, territory, but they're being controlled by Israel. So Israeli Navy intervened. Oh, interesting. Before we get to that, Israel was threatening. Actually, I believe some Israeli drones actually attacked the flotilla a bit
Mm-hmm.
when before it even got to Palestine. But the discussion around it started to be, well, we need to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually the Italian government, that is a far-right government, that is a Trump-supporting, Mussolini-sympathizing government, or whatever you want to call it, along with the Spanish government, that is technically a left government, yes, sent military ships to protect the flotilla. So, why did they do that? I guess maybe that's the first question. A lot of people saw that the sending of military ships to protect the flotilla, and I saw a lot of people celebrating that. Maybe we can get into like why did they do that thing where they sent the ships? It's connected a little bit to what we were talking about already, the shift in public opinion, the anger, and everything. So I don't know. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, just on this, because, yeah, it was the Spanish and Italian governments. And actually, this is quite telling itself because, like you said, the Spanish government is a nominally left-wing government. Socialist party is in power. Whereas in Italy, like you said, it's a hard right government. But they've both been compelled to deploy frigates to whatever, protect the flotilla. Of course, they did no such thing when push came to shove. But it shows you that it's really not a question of this or that government in power. It's a response to pressure from below. And that exists in the Spanish state, that exists in Italy. That what you were seeing in Italy in particular, I mean, on September 22nd, I think it was, you saw, I would say, the first big explosion in the movement. You know, it was a movement that was called by a, relatively small but militant union, the USB in Italy, which had been organizing dock workers and calling for blockades and so on and so forth. But it gained an echo amongst a wide layer of the Italian working class. And on September 22nd, what did we see? You had protests in, I think it was 80 cities and towns, at least.
Hundreds of
across
thousands
Italy.
of people out,
Hundreds of thousands of people. Like, I saw the pictures in Rome, in Naples, in Bologna, and in Milan. Huge militant protests. They'd blockaded the streets surrounding Rome. People were stuck in their cars. And I don't know if you saw the videos, but they were actually interviewing people who were stuck in their cars going into Rome.
Supporting the protests.
And they're supporting the protesters. They weren't bothered at all. They were cheering them on. So that really gives you a sense of the mood. I mean, these figures that we quoted for Canada are almost even certainly higher in a place like Italy. My cousin just came back from Italy, and he was saying that there was Palestinian flags everywhere.
Yeah.
Posters talking about genocide everywhere you went.
Yeah.
And that scared Meloni. That scared the Italian government. And again, it's the same thing that motivated Carney to recognize a Palestinian state. They had to do something, even if it was just for show, in order to try and appease that anger.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what motivated, the deploying of these ships. Now, of course, they didn't actually protect the flotilla. They told them to, you need to hand over the aid to the IDF. They encouraged them to turn around. And then as soon as they got close to the Gaza territorial waters, they turned back and said, essentially, you're on your own.
Yeah.
So it was really just for show. But the fact that they took that step shows you the anger, I think, in especially in Europe, but across the world.
Yeah, it shows you in particular, and that's one thing we're going to really hammer here, the power of the working class, actually. That is the real thing. Even in a passive form in the polls, they do make statements. But the power of the working class, that demo that you, or the demos that you, that actually were called under kind of, they used the French slogan, block everything, because they were taking inspiration from this movement of people in France after the fall of the government, and Macron nominated another one of his allies, and they're trying to ram through this reactionary budget, this bloquons tout, this block everything movement. They took the same slogan, and there was blocking of public services. There was actually real economic impact. Docks were blocked. So I think it shows the power of the working class, so much so that Meloni had criticized the flotilla, but then was scared and was forced to do this thing where she sends the ship to protect the flotilla. So, so this is the context in which this happens. And then the boats get sent back yesterday, So they didn't protect the flotilla. The flotilla gets over, gets attacked, boarded, people are detained by the IDF, and then yeah, things escalate. And yeah, the small union, the small Italian union, that called the thing immediately, or first in the first instance, the pressure was so massive that the big union, the CGIL, that's 5 million workers, they were forced to come on board, and now they've called a strike for tomorrow along with this smaller union. That's millions of workers that are going in Italy that are going to have a general strike. This is something else. At the same time, there's also a student strike called in Spain. And so, yeah, what you have is a general movement across Europe. And I would state again, and largely this isn't over. Sometimes people say, oh, workers only care about issues that are directly affecting them, like wages or housing or pensions. This is about a political issue. So we cannot not understate how important this movement is. And yeah, we believe as revolutionary communists, this is the way forward. That all of the other, there's been 2 years of different various methods and tactics tried. Overwhelmingly, maybe we can talk a little bit about that now. They would fall into a couple categories, I suppose. And the stuff that we've been critical of has been the liberal type of tactics that don't involve mass action, don't involve the working class, are quite easily just performative statements by liberals of all types that they can get away with without actually doing anything, or quite often while doing directly harmful things, but salvaging their public image, right? So, yeah, these methods of mass working class action point in the opposite direction of that, and as we can see, are the methods that actually are getting somewhere. So, yeah, I think that is something that maybe we should talk about now in terms of Canada, unless you have anything to add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what you said, I mean, I think a point I mentioned before, but it shows you that the masses are learning.
Yeah.
I think we said when this movement began, it wouldn't necessarily just be a gradual trajectory upwards, that the protests get bigger and bigger and bigger, but there'll be ups and downs, and that was the case with other movements. The protests against the Vietnam War, you could say, carried out a similar trajectory. But again, it's not, history doesn't waste anything. It's something, we say. Yes, the movement goes into declines, but people learn from the defeats. People learn from the mistakes. The encampment movement, for example, was filled with incredible promise when it was launched. It was an escalation of tactics. It raised positive demands. It was militant. It excited a lot of people, but then there was also a number of mistakes carried out. I would say, in particular, by this layer of activists who, essentially, you could say, took control of this movement in many cases. Who I would say, in many cases, intentionally kept the encampments small. Like, I remember visiting the encampment at U of T, and if you remember the encampment at U of T, the university had actually fenced it off, but then they could control who went in and who went out. But then a lot of times you would go there, and there was actually more supporters on the outside of the fence than there was inside of the fence, because they were so choosy, I guess.
Paranoid,
and
maybe?
Yeah, in terms of who gets in. Obviously, you need to take certain security precautions and so on. But what ultimately would have made this movement strong and protected the people there is by making it as big as possible. And I think in a lot of cases, the leadership, if you like, of these movements either didn't want to or didn't know how to do that. So the movement was small. It eventually petered out without achieving many of its aims. But people learn from that, right? Again, Italy went through this too. They also had an encampment movement. From my understanding, it was a very similar experience to what we saw in Canada. And now people are coming back, again, on a higher level. This time it's not just protest, it's blockades. In particular, you're seeing the involvement in a serious way by the working class, in particular the dock workers, who are, you had the example of the port of Livorno, which is blockaded for days. But that was, the dockers there, that was other workers, that was young people and students who visited the blockade to help strengthen that blockade. And they managed to turn back a ship destined for Israel. But again, that's a process of learning. It's you try things, they don't work, but then you learn from that process, and you come back with new tactics, better tactics. I think that's the process that we're seeing play out.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point to make there. So we've had, following up from the encampments, where yes, I do agree, they petered out and they didn't really meet their aims in general, and there were errors made. They kept them small, whatever. There's a lot of stuff. We talked about it in previous podcasts. But then, yeah, so based on that, we had put forward this idea of a student strike for Palestine last fall. And it had a certain effect in the sense that there was 85,000 students in Quebec that went on strike for a day or two. It was confined to Quebec at that point. And that was a very good step forward. And then last spring, there was actually a strike at UBC, and I believe there was one, where was the other one? At McGill, too. I think it was.
Sounds right.
Yeah, so there has been this, and these type of tactics is that sort of mass action, direct action of the masses themselves instead of these appeals to politicians, imperialist politicians who we cannot trust. We do not trust these people. We should not trust these people. We can really rely only on our own strength, that we believe as revolutionary communists, this is a class war. This is a class struggle. And so now, one thing I want to mention is related to all this. There's been a series of strike votes again in Quebec at multiple campuses. I don't even know the number of students that will be on strike, but for Monday, Tuesday, there will be tens of thousands of students on strike across Quebec so far, which is very good. It's happening at all of the same time as the student strike in Spain, this movement in Italy. Connected to that, there has been people in the movement in Canada who have, I think there's been, yeah, like you were saying, there's ups and downs. Because I think one thing that I've noticed is that at the beginning, in particular, of the movement in Canada, there was huge demos, tens of thousands of people, right, coming out in all the major cities. And then after a little while, they dwindled. They started to get smaller. Then there was a resurgence with the encampment movement. Then they started to get smaller again. Why? Now, some people, I have talked to some activists in the movement who have thought people don't care about Palestine. But then when I look at the polls, obviously the opposite's true. More people care about Palestine than they did before. So why aren't they showing up to the demo? Because consciousness doesn't work in this linear way, meaning the more you care about Palestine, the more demos you go to. That's not how it works. It's people realized that the demo wasn't working, and they wanted some other action. They were looking for some other action. They were looking for a realistic way to fight back. They didn't see the demo, and sometimes, at least in Toronto, the demo would go on for 4, 5, 6 hours. A lot of people, they don't see the point of that. So, yeah, this is why we put forward the student strike idea. And then there have been some people in the movement as well. Labor for Palestine came up with this hot cargo campaign. The New Brunswick, I believe it's the New Brunswick Labor Council, they passed a resolution declaring Israeli goods hot cargo, meaning that workers in New Brunswick will not touch them, which in our opinion, that's what we're talking about. We need this. So we have enthusiastically endorsed and taken up the hot cargo campaign. We've been trying to pass resolutions in the labor movement. We have in 2 separate unions to declare goods, Israeli goods, goods destined for the Israeli war machine as hot cargo, so workers won't touch it. So the whole idea is to get the working class involved. So these are the types of things that have happened in Canada. We're going to have this strike, the student strike next week in Quebec. I guess that sort of leads, like, there's a whole bunch of convergence of things happening here in the world. And so there's also, we talked about it at the beginning, this is the 2 years of genocide. So these protests, actually on Saturday, around the country. They'll probably be quite. I hope they're quite large. I expect they would be, given what's happening around the world. A lot of people watching what's happening in Europe with the flotilla
Hmm.
and whatnot, and they want to show up and demonstrate. But yeah, there needs, as I was saying, there needs to be more than just a demonstration. So maybe we can talk about, we're going to be at the demonstration in Toronto on Saturday, and we'll be at the demonstrations across the country, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what we are arguing for,
Hmm.
given all of these facts. I don't know. Do you want to maybe introduce? And then we can go back and
Well, I
forth
mean,
again.
I think to put it simply, we got to bring Italy to Canada.
Yeah.
What we're seeing in Italy, this escalation of the movement, this participation by the working class, this idea of let's block everything, this idea of student strikes, um, you know, going to the working class. These are the kinds of ideas that we need to bring to Canada.
Yeah.
I've even seen a lot of my friends on Facebook, are, excited by the scenes in Italy and, asking, well, where's the Canadian labor movement? Where's the Canadian labor leaders? Why haven't they
Good
said anything? Why
question.
haven't they done anything? I think, yeah, it's a very good question. I think what we need to argue first and foremost is that these methods work, uh, and they should come to Canada. And again, we see openings for that. Like you mentioned, the New Brunswick Federation of Labor,
Yep.
which, by the way, has a tradition of strikes against hot cargo. We wrote an article about it I think it was 1982 when they went on strike to try and stop the shipment to the dictatorship in Argentina for heavy water for a nuclear reactor. They did similar things during the Iraq War. A similar thing when the Canadian government was shipping, I think it was LAVs, light armored vehicles, to Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
So these workers had built up a tradition. So it's not really a surprise. It was a very positive step, but it shouldn't be contained to New Brunswick. I think we also need to point to examples like that.
Mm-hmm.
You have people who will say, oh, okay, maybe the Italians and the French and the Spaniards can go out and do these things. But Canadian workers, I don't know, maybe because it's colder in Canada, they're not gonna move. But again, we have the example in New Brunswick that we can point to and say, yeah, now other unions need to do the same thing. And I think the role that a group like ours can play, but not just us, anyone who's passionate about this issue, is to argue for a similar thing to be passed in the other trade unions. I think, even at the highest levels, the Canadian Labour Congress,
Yep.
I think it'd be incredibly positive if they came out tomorrow and said, listen, a majority of our members recognize that a genocide is taking place in Gaza. Also, most trade unions in Canada have gone on the record as supporting an arms embargo, that they don't believe the government should be selling any weapons to Israel.
Yep.
The government has not followed that. There was the report produced by the PYM and other groups, which showed, I think, very clearly that there are still weapon sales taking place by all kinds of circuitous routes. People can read the report. I think what the trade union movement needs to do is say, well, listen, we supported an arms embargo. You're not enforcing it. So now we're going to enforce it.
That's
We're
it.
issuing a hot cargo edict. We're directing all of our affiliate members, Israeli goods or hot cargo, do not touch it. If you're a dock worker, if you're a rail worker, whatever. And stop the shipment of all military goods to Israel. I think these are the kinds of ideas that we should be advocating for in the trade unions, in the workplaces. I think this is one of the things we can call for.
Yeah, that's very important. I think it's connected to the general concept we're talking about here from Italy, from Spain. It's that regular working class people taking matter into our own hands. They they won't do it. The ruling class won't do it. The politicians won't do it unless we make them. Or actually, if they won't do it, we'll do it.
Mm.
That's what some of the statements from the Italian dockers have basically been. You touch that flotilla, we'll shut down every port in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is the power of the working class, and we need to bring this to Canada. because Canada, the Canadian government is complicit, and Canadian corporations, Canadian universities are complicit in this genocide. I think that's a widely known fact now. What do we do about it? One thing, going back to a bit of some of the methods we don't agree with, I notice there's kind of this idea that if we just morally shame and pressure them, maybe they will change and do the right thing. I think this is a completely mistaken idea. Imperialism, and we are in an imperialist country. We are in Canada. Canada is an imperialist power. Imperialism, that what are the morals of imperialism? Money, imperialist interest, spheres of power, of trade, of all this type of thing. And Canada is as tied to Israel as America is. They're part of that Western imperialist alliance. They're not going to easily drop that. So they're not going to. Let me put it this way: imperialism acquiesces to power, not moral shaming and guilt. So, what is the power in society? The power of the working class. So, the only way to really have an arms embargo and to really win, and even to force them to do anything, because you can sometimes force the government to do something, is through the power of the masses. I think Italy, Spain have shown that to some degree. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. But I think in Italy, this is amazing. This general strike that's declared, I think it can be quite massive and can have a real impact, especially the ports, the transport shutdown, the impact concretely, but also on the minds of millions of people in Italy and across the world, where people realize, wow, we can do it. We have the power. And that's really what we need to do here. I guess one other thing. So there has been, I mentioned this hot cargo campaign. There has been, I don't know, there's been a tendency for, I don't know how else to describe it, like other than resolutions and motions and initiatives in the trade union movement put forward that are things that I wouldn't disagree with, but are not, I guess to use a more academic word, actionable. They're not resolutions that bring the workers into the struggle. For example, there was a resolution passed by Unifor. This summer, they made a big deal about it. There was even some of the Labor for Palestine people that called it a hot cargo resolution. It was not a hot cargo resolution. It had nothing to do with that. It was just a basic resolution. And Unifor actually, importantly, is the biggest private sector union in the country. They unionize a lot of transport workers. So the workers in Unifor, I believe they even have unionized one plant that produces some military equipment. These workers are ones that could directly actually implement a hot cargo campaign. But yeah, there hasn't been. There unfortunately was not that put forward at the Unifor convention. And this is what we really need. We really need measures that put forward the working class as the main actor here, that can actually implement change, that can actually implement an arms embargo, can then stop the shipments of arms to Israel. And, I've heard some people say, but all the arms are coming from America. Canada doesn't send that many arms. Okay, that is true, but we are in Canada. So we're going to do what we can. And solidarity and inspiring movements never respect borders. So, and actually this thing in Italy, I think everyone here is watching what's happening in Italy, what's happening in Spain, what's happening in Europe, and they're getting inspiration from it. So we need to keep the momentum going. We need to spread those lessons. This is all what internationalism is about, right? It's not one struggle of workers over here and over here. It's the struggle of the working class of the world. Workers of the world unite. That's what we are here to put forward as communists. So, we need the labor movement to come to bear. We need the working class to come to bear. If that happened, if the labor leaders moved their little finger and gave an ounce of leadership, I believe that would, this argument that people don't care. I believe they care. They're just waiting for something that actually will solve the problem. So this is what would solve the problem. We were talking earlier, fight like an Italian. You should take the take the example of the Italian trade
Mm-hmm.
union movement and use those methods in Canada. Block everything,
Mm-hmm.
organize a generalized movement, spread and escalate the student strikes. Actually, one thing we should mention is last fall when we had these student strikes, a lot of the student unions that correctly voted for student strikes in Quebec treated it as a one-off, and then they dwindled, and then there was no follow-up. There was no extended campaign. Even leading up to the strike, there was very little mobilization. Our opinion is we can't make that mistake again. One-offs are not enough. We need a generalized movement because we need to spread it to the rest of the country. We need to spread it to English Canada, and we need to build a mass movement and a campaign that shuts down universities and then spreads to the working class. So yeah, these are the types of methods that we put forward as revolutionary communists. We need class struggle methods of action. I believe that's really what the Italian example, the Spanish examples are showing what's happening in Europe. It's showing really what needs to happen in Canada. So, is there anything you want to add on here?
And the only thing I would add, I mean, is just that there's lots of ways to do this. I mean, obviously, passing resolutions can have a positive effect.
Yeah.
It starts a discussion, but that's not the end of the story. But you could have, for example, a situation where, a union which is more, pro-Palestine, let's put it that way. There's certain unions which are more vocal on this issue,
Like QP or
like
something.
QP or, a figure like Fred Hahn.
Yeah.
But imagine if, they were to call a mass demonstration
Mm.
to bring their members out. Maybe they, brought a large contingent to the rally this Saturday and then said, listen, we're going to go down to the railway depots. We're going to go down to the docks. And, maybe they've reached out to the workers beforehand. And listen, we're going to try and argue our case with these workers. The point is that there needs to be a dialogue with these workers. You can't, a small group of activists block a port or block a train by yourself. But, you come in with, hundreds, thousands of other workers, make that case, establish that dialogue. That's a very, I think, concrete way that the more pro-Palestine organizations and unions can play in actually winning the working class. Although, to be honest, I think most working people, most of these trade union members would agree.
Yeah, they support Palestine.
Yeah, because they recognize this as a genocide. But that's not enough. It needs to be given a direction. There needs to be some kind of organized force to say, okay, listen, this is what we need to do. And we're going to support you if you take that action.
Yeah.
I think that's something a bit more concrete. Obviously, resolutions and things like this also play a role. Protests in general also play a positive role. But it needs to be directed somewhere. Otherwise, we're going to have the same process that we saw before, which is probably, I would expect, a large demo this Saturday, at least bigger than we've seen over the last few months.
There'll be thousands probably. Yeah.
Probably
10,000,
thousands, maybe
more.
even larger, who knows. But if it doesn't have a direction, if, what the organizers of this rally is going to do is just the same old thing that we've seen the last 2 years, then it's going to go the same direction. It needs to be pointed, it needs to be escalated.
Mm-hmm.
And Italy shows the way of how to do that. So this is what we need to. It's not easy. No one's saying it's easy to, to organize blockades and to, convince workers to take these actions. No one is saying that. But what other options do we have? These people the Palestinian people are in the process of being erased from the face of the earth. The world is horrified. Something needs to be done.
Yeah, connected to this, what I have noticed in Europe, what you have is you have mass actions, not just, and how do you have mass action? Well, the mass action is announced by the unions, and then the masses are the ones that respond and carry it out, right? And they mobilize them. Here, quite often, I've talked to some activists who said, "Oh, we tried to blockade this, and this factory or this port or this railway station or whatever depot," and the way in which it was carried out is in a totally secretive way. And I kind of understand the logic. The logic is, well, if we advertise ahead of time, the police are going to be there and they'll stop us. And it's like, but if the trade unions, as you said, if the trade unions called mass pickets, a mass movement, a mass demonstrations that then walk down or block it, it's sort of like when it's a mass thing that they can be involved in. These secretive little games lose their importance. You don't need to do it secretively. You need to do it transparently in the open, mobilizing this majority of the population to fight and to actually stop the Israeli war machine or stop the Canadian complicity in it. So,
And I would also just add to that it also goes against the advice of the trade unions in Palestine, which I don't know if you saw, but
I don't know
a
what you're
little
talking
while ago they issued a statement calling for solidarity. And one of the points they made is that in order for these kind of actions to be effective, it has to be the initiative of the workers themselves.
Yeah.
That there needs to be a dialogue, that the workers themselves need to be convinced that it can't just be a small group from the outside essentially doing the work of the working class for them.
That's it.
And just to say, like, obviously you mentioned it, I mean, it's incredibly, same with the flotilla, I would say. It's incredibly brave and heroic. Like, I've got nothing but respect, if you like,
Yeah.
for people who are willing to risk arrest and, because again, they're horrified by what they're seeing. But again, it's not just a question of what's morally good. It's a question of what actually gets the job done. And if you don't have the workers on side, you don't get the job done. The goods still get transported. Yes, it takes longer, but it's far more effective when you do it. And that's, and it's, I would say, never been more likely than now to achieve that because of what's happening in Europe. But, people said the same thing about, we were talking about this, about the Italians a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
That, why can't they be like workers in other countries, Because, again, the movement in
Why
Italy
can't we
was
be
dead.
like the French,
And now everyone's saying, oh, wow, yeah, fight like an Italian.
Yeah.
Again, it shows you, again, there's a short-sightedness with some people. It's understandable.
Yeah.
Because, they're taking an impressionistic approach that, okay, right now the situation is in an ebb. But again, it masks what's happening underneath the surface, which is a seething anger, which eventually is going to express itself. And that can happen in Canada too.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, we're here to say fight like an Italian, adopt class struggle methods to fight against the genocide in Palestine, to fight against imperialism. That's what we can do in Canada. The movement needs to learn that this is the way forward. We've been explaining this right from the beginning. Only the working class can fight imperialism. Only the working class can stop the genocide. And I think this is a case of internationalism in action, really. The working class in Europe showing the way, and we need to bring that to the movement in Canada. So yeah, if you agree with us, if you like what you're hearing, and you want to help us spread this movement, spread this message to the movement in Canada, to the labor movement, to the student movement, on the demos here on Saturday, so we can really escalate the movement and revive the Palestine solidarity movement in Canada. Get in touch with us. Join the Revolutionary Communist Party, and let's fight. Let's fight to build the movement and to bring working class struggle methods to the movement here in Canada.